Volume 3, Chapter 15 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Daring Visit. Mercy soon learned that some sort of encounter had taken place between her father's shooting party and some of the clan, also that the chief was hurt, but not in what manner, for by silent agreement that was not mentioned. It might seem to put them in the wrong. She had heard enough, however, to fill her with anxiety. Her window commanding the ridge by the castle, she seated herself to watch that point with her opera glass. When the hill party came from behind the ruin, she missed his tall figure amongst his people, and presently discovered him lying very white on one of the carts. Her heart became as water within her, but instant contriving how she could reach him kept her up. By and by Christina came to tell her she had just heard from one of the servants that the Macruadh was shot. Mercy, having seen him alive, heard the frightful news with tolerable calmness. Christina said she would do her best to discover before the morning how much he was hurt. No one in the house seemed able to tell her. Mercy, to avoid implicating her sister, held her peace as to her own intention. As soon as it was dark, she prepared to steal from the house, dreading nothing but prevention. When her dinner was brought her, and she knew they were all safe in the dining room, she drew her plaid over her head, and leaving her food untasted, stole half down the stair, whence, watching her opportunity between the comings and goings of the waiting servants, she presently got away unseen, crept softly past the windows, and when out of the shrubbery, darted off at her full speed. Her breath was all but gone when she knocked at the drawing-room door of the cottage. It opened, and there stood the mother of her chief. The moment Mrs. Macruadh saw her, leaving her no time to say a word, she bore down upon her like one vessel that would sink another, pushing her from the door, and pulling it to behind her, stern as righteous fate. Mercy was not going to be put down, however. She was doing nothing wrong. "How is the Macruadh, please?" she managed to say. "Alive, but terribly hurt," answered his mother, and would have borne her out of the open door of the cottage, towards the latch of which she reached her hand while yet a yard from it. Her action said, "Why will Nancy leave the door open?" "Please, please, what is it?" panted Mercy, standing her ground. "How is he hurt?" She turned upon her almost fiercely. "This is what you have done for him," she said, with right ungenerous reproach. "Your father fired at him on my son's own land, and shot him in the chest." "Is he in danger?" gasped Mercy, leaning against the wall and trembling so she could scarcely stand. "I fear he is in great danger. If only the doctor would come!" "You wouldn't mind my sitting in the kitchen till he does?" whispered Mercy, her voice all but gone. "I could not allow it. I will not connive at your coming here without the knowledge of your parents. It is not at all a proper thing for a young lady to do." "Then I will wait outside," said Mercy, her quick temper waking in spite of her anxiety. She had anticipated coldness, but not treatment like this. "There is one, I think, Mrs. Macruadh," she added, "who will not find fault with me for it." "At least he will not tell you so for some time." The door had not been quite closed, and it opened noiselessly. "She does not mean me, mother," said Alister. "She means Jesus Christ. He would say to you, 'Let her alone.' He does not care for society. Its ways are not his ways, nor its laws his laws. Come in, Mercy. I am sorry my mother's trouble about me should have made her inhospitable to you." "I cannot come in, Alister, if she will not let me," answered Mercy. "Pray walk in," said Mrs. Macruadh. She would have passed Mercy, going toward the kitchen, but the trance was narrow, and Mercy did not move. "You see, Alister, I cannot," she insisted. "That would not please, would it?" she added reverently. "Tell me how you are, and I will go and come again tomorrow." Alister told her what had befallen, making little of the affair, and saying he suspected it was an accident. "Oh, thank you!" she said with a sigh of relief. "I meant to sit by the castle wall till the doctor came, but now I shall get back before they discover I am gone." Without a word more, she turned and ran from the house, and reached her room unmissed and unseen. The next was a dreary hour, the most painful that mother and son had ever passed together. The mother was all this time buttressing her pride with her grief, and the son was cut to the heart that he should have had to take part against his mother. But when the doctor came at length, and the mother saw him take out his instruments, the pride that parted her from her boy melted away. "Forgive me, Alister," she whispered, and his happy kiss comforted her repentant soul. When the small operations were over, and Alister was in bed, she would have gone to let Mercy know all she could tell her, but she must not. It would work mischief in the house. She sat down by Alister's bedside and watched him all night. He slept well, being in such a healthful condition of body that his loss of blood and the presence of the few shots that could not be found did him little harm. He yielded to his mother's entreaties to spend the morning in bed, but was up long before the evening in the hope of Mercy's coming, confident that his mother would now be like herself to her. She came. The mother took her in her arms and begged her forgiveness, nor, having thus embraced her, could she any more treat her relation to her son with coldness. If the girl was ready, as her conduct showed, to leave all for Alister, she had saved her soul alive. She was no more one of the enemy. Thus was the mother repaid for her righteous education of her son. Through him her pride received almost a mortal blow. Her justice grew more discriminating, and her righteousness more generous. In a few days the chief was out, and looking quite himself. End of Volume 3, Chapter 15. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 16 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Flitting. The time was drawing nigh when the warning of ejection would doubtless begin to be put in force, and the chief, hearing, through Rob of the Angels, that attempts were making to stir the people up, determined to render them futile. They must be a trick of the enemy to get them into trouble. Taking counsel, therefore, with the best of the villagers, both women and men, he was confirmed in the idea that they had better all remove together before the limit of the earliest notice was expired. But his counsellors agreed with him that the people should not be told to get themselves in readiness, except at a moment's notice to move. In the meantime he pushed on their labour at the new village. In the afternoon preceding the day on which certain of the clan were to be the first cast out of their homes, the chief went to the village, and going from house to house, told his people to have everything in order for flitting that very night, so that in the morning there should not be an old shoe left behind, and to let no rumour of their purpose get abroad. They would thus have a good laugh at the enemy, who was reported to have applied for military assistance as a precautionary measure. His horses should be ready, and as soon as it was dark, they would begin to cart and carry, and be snug in their new houses before the morning. All agreed, and a tumult of preparation began. Lady Macruadh came with help and counsel, and took the children in charge while the mothers bustled. It was amazing how much had to be done to remove so small an amount of property. The chief's 3 carts were first laden, then the men and women loaded each other. The chief took on his back the biggest load of all, except indeed it were Hector's. To and fro went the carts, and to and fro went the men and women, I know not how many journeys, upheld by companionship, merriment, hope, and the clan mother's plentiful provision of tea, coffee, milk, bread and butter, cold mutton and ham, luxurious fare to all. As the sun was rising, they closed every door, and walked for the last time, laden with the last of their goods, out of the place of their oppression, leaving behind them not a cock to crow, a peat to burn, or a scrap that was worth stealing. All removed in such order and silence that not one, even at the new house, had a suspicion of what was going on. Mercy, indeed, as she sat looking from her window like Daniel praying toward Jerusalem, her constant custom now, even when there was no moon to show what lay before her, did think she heard strange sounds coming faintly through the night from the valley below. Even thought she caught shadowy glimpses of a shapeless, gnome-like train moving along the road. But she only wondered if the Highlands had suddenly gifted her with a second sight, and these were the brain phantasms of coming events. She listened and gazed, but could not be sure that she heard or saw. When she looked out in the morning, however, she understood, for the castle ridge was almost hidden in the smoke that poured from every chimney of the new village. Her heart swelled with joy to think of her chief with all his people under his eyes, and within reach of his voice. From her window they seemed so many friends gathered to comfort her solitude, or the camp of an army come to set her free. Hector and Rob, with one or two more of the clan, hid themselves to watch those who came to evict the first of the villagers. There were no military. 2 sheriff's officers, a good many constables, and a few vagabonds made up the party. Rob's keen eye enabled him to distinguish the very moment when first they began to be aware of something unusual about the place. He saw them presently halt and look at each other as if the duty before them were not altogether canny. At no time would there be many signs of life in the poor hamlet, but there would always be some sounds of handicraft, some shuttle or hammer going, some cries of children weeping or at play, some noises of animals, some ascending smoke, some issuing or entering shape. They feared an ambush, a sudden onslaught. Warily they stepped into the place, sharply and warily they looked about them in the street. Slowly and with circumspection they opened door after door, afraid of what might be lurking behind to pounce upon them at unawares. Only after searching every house and discovering not the smallest sign of the presence of living creature, did they recognize their fool's errand. And all the time there was the new village smoking hard under the very windows, as he chose himself to say, of its chief adversary. End of Volume 3, Chapter 16. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 17 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The New Village. The winter came down upon them early, and the chief and his mother had a sore time of it. Well as they had known it before, the poverty of their people was far better understood by them now. Unable to endure the sight of it, and spending more and more to meet it, they saw it impossible for them to hold out. For a long time their succour had been draining if not exhausting the poor resources of the chief. He had borne up in the hope of the money he was so soon to receive, and now there was none, and the need greater than ever. He was not troubled, for his faith was simple and strong, but his faith made him the more desirous of doing his part for the coming deliverance. Faith in God compels and enables a man to be fellow worker with God. He was now waiting the judgment of Ian concerning the prospects of the settlers in that part of Canada to which he had gone, hoping it might help him to some resolve in view of the worst difficulties at hand. In the meantime the clan was more comfortable, and passed the winter more happily than for many years. First of all, they had access to the chief at any moment. Then he had prepared a room in his own house, where were always fire and light for such as would read what books he was able to lend them, or play at quiet games. To them its humble arrangements were sumptuous, and best of all, he would, in the long dark forenights, as the Lowland Scotch call them, read aloud, at one time in Gaelic, at another in English, things that gave them great delight. Donal shoemaker was filled with joy unutterable at the rhyme of the ancient mariner. If only this state of things could be kept up, with Ian back and Mercy married to the chief, thought the mother. But it was not to be. That grew plainer every day. Mr. Palmer would gladly have spent his winter elsewhere, leaving his family behind him, but as things were, he could not leave them, and as certain other things were, he did not care to take them to London. Besides, for them all to leave now would be to confess defeat, and who could tell what hurt to his forest might not follow in his absence from the cowardly hatred of the peasants. He was resolved to see the thing out, but above all, he must keep that worthless girl, Mercy, under his own eye. "That's what comes of not drinking," he would say to himself. "A man grows as proud as Satan, and makes himself a curse to his neighbours." Then he would sigh like a man ill-used and disconsolate. But Mercy and the chief thought it better not to venture much, but they did occasionally contrive to meet for a few minutes, by the help of Christina generally. Twice only was Mercy's handkerchief hung from the window, when her longing for his voice had grown almost too strong for her to bear. The signal brought him both times through the wild wintry storm, joyous as a bird through the summer air. Once or twice they met just outside the gate, Mercy flying like a snowbird to the tryst, and as swiftly back through the keen blue frost, when her breath as she ran seemed to linger in the air like smoke, and threatened to betray her. At length came the much desired letter from Ian, full of matter for the enabling of the chief's decision. Two things had long been clear to Alister: that, even if the ground he had could keep his people alive, it certainly could not keep them all employed; and that, if they went elsewhere, especially to any town, it might induce for many, and ensure for their children, a lamentable descent in the moral scale. He was their shepherd, and must lose none of them. Therefore, first of all, he must not lose sight of them. It was now clear also that the best and most desirable thing was, that the poor remnant of the clan should leave their native country, and betake themselves where not a few of their own people, among them Lachlan and Annie, would welcome them to probable ease and comfort. There he would buy land, settle with them, and build a village. Some would cultivate the soil under their chief, others would pursue their trades for the good of the community and themselves. And now came once more the love of land face to face with the love of men, and in the chief's heart paled before it. There was but one way to get the needful money: the last of the Macruadh property must go. Not for one moment did it rouse a grudging thought in the chief. It was for the sake of the men and women and children whose lives would be required of him. The land itself must yield them wings to forsake it withal, and fly beyond the sea. End of Volume 3, Chapter 17. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 18 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A friendly offer. It was agreed between mother and son to submit the matter to Ian, and if he should be of the same mind, at once to negotiate the sale of the land, in order to carry the clan to Canada. They wrote therefore to Ian, and composed themselves to await his answer. It was a sorrowful thing to Alister to seem for a moment to follow the example of the recreant chiefs whose defection to feudalism was the prelude to their treachery toward their people, and whose faithlessness had ruined the Highlands. But unlike Glengarry or Esau Rie, he desired to sell his lands that he might keep his people, care for them, and share with them. His people safe, what mattered the acres? Reflecting on the thing, he saw, in the case of Ian's approval of the sale, no reason why he should not show friendliness where none was expected, and give Mr. Peregrine Palmer the first chance of purchase. He thought also, with his usual hopefulness, that the time might come when the clan, laying its savings together, would be able to redeem its ancient homesteads, and then it might be an advantage that they were all in the possession of one man. Such things had been, and might be again. The Lord could bring again the captivity of Clanruadh as well as that of Zion. 2 months passed, and they had Ian's answer, when it was well on into the spring, and weather good for sea voyage was upon its way. Because of the loss of their uncle's money, and the good prospect of comfort in return for labour, hard but not killing, Ian entirely approved of the proposal. From that moment the thing was no longer discussed, but how best to carry it out. The chief assembled the clan in the barn, read his brother's letter, and in a simple speech acquainted them with the situation. He told them of the loss of the money to which he had looked for the power to aid them, reminded them that there was neither employment nor subsistence enough on the land, not even if his mother and he were to live like the rest of them, which, if necessary, they were quite prepared to do, and stated his resolve to part with the remnant of it in order to provide the means of their migrating in a body to Canada, where not a few old friends were eager to welcome them. There they would buy land, he said, of which every man that would cultivate it should have a portion enough to live upon, while those with trades should have every facility for following them. All, he believed, would fare well in return for hard work, and they would be in the power of no man. There was even a possibility, he hoped, that if they lived and laboured well, they might one day buy back the home they had left, or if not they, their sons and daughters might return from their captivity, and restore the house of their fathers. If anyone would not go, he would do for him what seemed fair. Donal shoemaker arose, unpuckered his face, slackened the purse strings of his mouth, and said, "Where my chief goes, I will go. Where my chief lives, I will live. And where my chief is buried, God grant I may be buried also, with all my family." He sat down, covered his face with his hands, and wept and sobbed. One voice rose from all present. "We'll go, Macruadh, we'll go. Our chief is our home." The chief's heart swelled with mingled gladness and grief, but he answered quietly, "Then you must at once begin your preparations. We ought not to be in a hurry at the last." An immediate stir, movement, bustle followed. There was much talking, and many sunny faces over which kept sweeping the clouds of sorrow. The next morning the chief went to the new house and desired to see Mr. Palmer. He was shown into what the new laird called his study. Mr. Palmer's first thought was that he had come to call him to account for firing at him. He neither spoke nor advanced a step to meet him. The chief stood still some yards from him, and said as pleasantly as he could, "You are surprised to see me, Mr. Palmer." "I am." "I come to ask if you would like to buy my land." "Already!" said Mr. Palmer, cast on his enemy a glare of victory, and so stood regarding him. The chief did not reply. "Well," said Mr. Palmer. "I wait your answer," returned the chief. "Did it never strike you that insolence might be carried too far?" "I came for your sake more than my own," rejoined the chief, without even a shadow of anger. "I have no particular desire that you should take the land, but thought it reasonable you should have the first offer." "What a dull ox the fellow must take me for!" remarked the new laird to himself. "It's all a dodge to get into the house, as if he would sell me his land, or could think I would hold any communication with him. Buy his land! It's some trick, I'll lay my soul. The infernal scoundrel! Such a mean-spirited wretch, too! Takes an ounce of shot in the stomach, and never says, 'What the devil do you mean by it?' I don't believe the savage ever felt it." Something like this passed with thought's own swiftness through the mind of Mr. Palmer, as he stood looking the chief from head to foot, yet in his inmost person feeling small before him. "If you cannot at once make up your mind," said Alister, "I will give you till tomorrow to think it over." "When you have learned to behave like a gentleman," answered the new laird, "let me know, and I will refer you to my factor." He turned and rang the bell. Alister bowed and did not wait for the servant. It must be said for Mr. Palmer, however, that morning Christina had positively refused to listen to a word more from Mr. Sercombe. In the afternoon, Alister set out for London. End of Volume 3, Chapter 18. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 19 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Another expulsion. Mr. Peregrine Palmer brooded more and more upon what he counted the contempt of the chief. It became in him almost a fixed idea. It had already sent out several succours, and had, amongst others, developed the notion that he was despised by those from whom first of all he looked for the appreciation after which his soul thirsted, his own family. He grew therefore yet more moody, and his moodiness and distrust developed suspicion. It is scarce credible what a crushing influence the judgment he pretended to scorn thus exercised upon him. It was not that he acknowledged in it the smallest justice, neither was it that he cared altogether for what such a fanatical fool as the chief might think, but he reflected that if one could so despise his money because of its source, there might be others, might be many who did so. At the same time, had he been sure of the approbation of all the world beside, it would have troubled him not a little, in his thirst after recognition, that any gentleman, one of family especially, however old-fashioned and absurd he might be, should look down upon him. His smouldering, causelessly excited anger, his evident struggle to throw off an oppression, and the fierce resentment of the chief's judgment which he would now and then betray, revealed how closely the offence clung to his consciousness. Flattering himself from her calmness that Mercy had got over her foolish liking for the boor, as he would not unfrequently style the chief, he had listened to the prayers of her mother, and submitted to her company at the dinner table, but he continued to treat her as one who had committed a shameful fault. That evening the great little man could hardly eat for recurrent wrathful memories of the interview of the morning. Perhaps his most painful reflection was that he had not been quick enough to embrace the opportunity of annihilating his enemy. Thunder lowered portentous in his black brows, and not until he had drunk several glasses of wine did a word come from his lips. His presence was purgatory without the purifying element. "What do you think that fellow has been here about this morning?" he said at length. "What fellow?" asked his wife unnecessarily, for she knew what visitor had been shown into the study. "The Highland fellow," he answered, "that claims to do what he pleases on my property." Mercy's face grew hot. "Came actually to offer me the refusal of his land. The merest trick to get into the house, confound him! As much as told me, if I did not buy it off-hand, I should not have the chance again. The cheek of the brute! To dare show his face in my house after trifling with my daughter's affections on the pretence that he could not marry a girl whose father was in trade!" Mercy felt she would be false to the man she loved, and whom she knew to be true, if she did not speak. She had no thought of defending him, but simply of witnessing to him. "I beg your pardon, papa," she said, "but the Macruadh never trifled with me. He loves me, and has not given me up. If he told you he was going to part with his land, he is going to part with it, and came to you first because he must return good for evil. I saw him from my window ride off as if he were going to meet the afternoon coach." She would not have been allowed to say so much had not her father been speechless with rage. This was more than he or any man could bear. He rose from the table, his eyes blazing. "Return me good for evil!" he exclaimed. "A beast who has done me more wrong than ever I did in all my life! A scoundrel bumpkin who loses not an opportunity of insulting me as never man was insulted before! You are an insolent, heartless, depraved girl, ready to sacrifice yourself, body and soul, to a man who despises you and yours with the pride of a savage! You hussy! I can scarce keep my hands off you!" He came toward her with a threatful stride. She rose, pushed back her chair, and stood facing him. "Strike me," she said with a choking voice, "if you will, papa. But mamma knows I am not what you call me. I should be false and cowardly if I did not speak the truth for the man to whom I owe—" She was going to say more than to any other human being, but she checked herself. "If the beggar is your god," said her father, and struck her on the cheek with his open hand, "you can go to him." He took her by the arm and pushed her before him out of the room and across the hall, then opening the door, shoved her from him into the garden, and flung the door to behind her. The rain was falling in torrents. The night was very dark, and when the door shut, she felt as if she had lost her eyesight. It was terrible, but, thank God, she was free. Without a moment's hesitation, while her mother wept and pleaded, Christina stood burning with indignation. The two little ones sat white, with open mouths, and the servants hurried about scared, but trying to look as if nothing had happened. Mercy fled into the dark. She stumbled into the shrubbery several times, but at last reached the gate, and while they imagined her standing before the house waiting to be let in, was running from it as if from the jaws of the pit, in terror of a voice calling her back. The pouring rain was sweet to her whole indignant person, and especially to the cheek where burned the brand of her father's blow. The way was deep in mud, and she slipped and fell more than once as she ran. Mrs. Macruadh was sitting in the little parlour, no one but Nancy in the house, when the door opened, and in came the wild-looking girl, draggled and spent, and dropped kneeling at her feet. Great masses of long black hair hung dripping with rain about her shoulders. Her dress was torn and wet, and soiled with clay from the road and earth from the shrubbery. One cheek was white, and the other had a red patch on it. "My poor child!" cried the mother. "What has happened? Alister is away." "I know that," panted Mercy. "I saw him go, but I thought you would take me in, though you do not like me much." "Not like you, my child!" echoed the mother tenderly. "I love you. Are you not my Alister's choice? There are things I could have wished otherwise, but—" "Well could I wish them otherwise too," interposed Mercy. "I do not wish another father, and I am not quite able to wish he hadn't struck me and put me out into the dark and rain, but—" "Struck you and put you out! My child, what did he do it for?" "Perhaps I deserved it. It is difficult to know how to behave to a father. A father is supposed to be one whom you not only love as I do mine, but of whom you can be proud as well. I can't be proud of mine, and don't know quite how to behave to him. Perhaps I ought to have held my peace, but when he said things that were not correct about Alister, misinterpreting him altogether, I felt it cowardly and false to hold my tongue. So I said I did not believe that was what Alister meant. It is but a quarter of an hour ago, and it looks a fortnight. I don't think I quite know what I am saying." She ceased, laid her head on Mrs. Macruadh's knee, then sank to the floor and lay motionless. All the compassion of the woman, all the protective pride of the chieftainess woke in the mother. She raised the girl in her arms, and vowed that not one of her house should set eyes on her again without the consent of her son. He should see how his mother cared for what was his, how wide her arms, how big her heart to take in what he loved. Dear to him, the daughter of the man she despised should be as the apple of her eye. They would of course repent and want her back, but they should not have her. Neither should a sound of threat or demand reach the darling's ears. She should be in peace until Alister came to determine her future. There was the mark of the wicked hand on the sweet sallow cheek. She was not beautiful, but she would love her the more to make up. Thank God they had turned her out, and that made her free of them. They should not have her again. Alister should have her, and from the hand of his mother. She got her to bed, and sent for Rob of the Angels. With injunctions to silence, she told him to fetch his father and be ready as soon as possible to drive a cart to the chief's cave, there to make everything comfortable for herself and Miss Mercy Palmer. Mercy slept well, and as the day was breaking, Mrs. Macruadh woke her and helped her to dress. Then they walked together through the lovely spring morning to the turn of the valley road, where a cart was waiting them, half filled with oat straw. They got in and were borne up and up at a walking pace to the spot Mercy knew so well. Never by swiftest coach had she enjoyed a journey so much as that slow crawl up the mountains in the rough springless cart of her ploughman lover. She felt so protected, so happy, so hopeful. Alister's mother was indeed a hiding place from the wind, a covert from the tempest. Having consented to be her mother, she could mother her no way but entirely. An outcast for the sake of her Alister, she should have the warmest corner of her heart next to him and Ian. Into the tomb they went, and found everything strangely comfortable. The stone floor covered with warm and woolly skins of black-faced sheep, a great fire glowing, plenty of provisions hung and stored, and the deaf, keen-eyed father with a swift, keen-eared son for attendants. "You will not mind sharing your bed with me, will you, my child?" said Mrs. Macruadh. "Our accommodation is scanty, but we shall be safe from intrusion. Only those two faithful men know where we are." "Mother will be terribly frightened," said Mercy. "I thought of that, and left a note with Nancy, telling her you were safe and well, but giving no hint of where. I said that her dove had flown to my bosom for shelter, and there she should have it." Mercy answered with a passionate embrace. End of Volume 3, Chapter 19. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 20 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Alister's Princess. 10 peaceful days they spent in the cave house. It was cold outside, but the clear air of the hilltop was delicious, and inside it was warm and dry. There were plenty of books, and Mercy never felt the time a moment too long. The mother talked freely of her sons, and of their father, of the history of the clan, of her own girlhood, and of the hopes and intentions of her sons. "Will you go with him, Mercy?" she asked, laying her hand on hers. "I would rather be his servant," answered Mercy, "than remain at home. There is no life there." "There is life wherever there is the will to live, that is, to do the thing that is given one to do," said the mother. In writing she told Alister nothing of what had happened. He might hurry home without completing his business. Undisturbed by fresh anxiety, he settled everything, parted with his property to an old friend of the family, and received what would suffice for his further intents. He also chartered a vessel to take them over the sea, and to save weariness and expense, arranged for it to go northward as far as a certain bay on the coast, and there take the clan on board. When at length he reached home, Nancy informed him that his mother was at the hill house, and begged he would go there to her. He was a good deal perplexed. She very seldom went there, and had never before gone for the night, and it was so early in the season. He set out immediately. It was twilight when he reached the top of the hill, and no light shone from the little windows of the tomb. That day Mercy had been amusing her protectress with imitations, in which kind she had some gift, of certain of her London acquaintance. When the mother heard her son's approaching step, a thought came to her. "Here, quick," she said, "put on my cap and shawl, and sit in this chair. I will go into the bedroom. Then do as you like." When the chief entered, he saw the form of his mother, as he thought, bending over the peat fire, which had sunk rather low. In his imagination he saw again the form of his uncle as on that night in the low moonlight. She did not move, did not even look up. He stood still for a moment. A strange feeling possessed him of something not being as it ought to be. But he recovered himself with an effort, and kneeling beside her, put his arms round her, not a little frightened at her continued silence. "What is the matter, mother dear?" he said. "Why have you come up to this lonely place?" When first Mercy felt his arms, she could not have spoken if she would. Her heart seemed to grow too large for her body. But in a moment or two she controlled herself, and was able to say, sufficiently in his mother's tone and manner to keep up the initiated misconception, "They put me out of the house, Alister." "Put you out of the house!" he returned, like one hearing and talking in a dream. "Who dared interfere with you, mother? Am I losing my senses? I seem not to understand my own words." "Mr. Palmer." "Mr. Palmer? Was it to him I sold the land in London? What could he have to do with you, mother? How did they allow him to come near the house in my absence? Oh, I see. He came and worried you so about Mercy that you were glad to take refuge from him up here. I understand now." He ended in a tone of great relief. He felt as if he had just recovered his senses. "No, that was not it. But we are going so soon, there would have been no good in fighting it out. We are going soon, are we not?" "Indeed we are, please God," replied the chief, who had relapsed into bewilderment. "That is well, for you more than anybody. Would you believe it? The worthless girl vows she will never leave her mother's house." "Ah, mother, you never heard her say so. I know Mercy better than that. She will leave it when I say come. But that won't be now. I must wait and come and fetch her when she is of age." "She is not worthy of you." "She is worthy of me if I were 20 times worthier. Mother, mother, what has turned you against us again? It is not like you to change about so. I cannot bear to find you changeable. I should have sworn you were just the one to understand her perfectly. I cannot bear you should let unworthy reasons prejudice you against anyone. If you say a word more against her, I will go and sit outside with the moon. She is not up yet, but she will be presently. And though she is rather old and silly, I shall find her much better company than you, mother dear." He spoke playfully, but was grievously puzzled. "To whom are you talking, Alister? Yourself or a ghost?" Alister started up, and saw his mother coming from the bedroom with a candle in her hand. He stood stupefied. He looked again at the seated figure, still bending over the fire. Who was it, if not his mother? With a wild burst of almost hysterical laughter, Mercy sprang to her feet and threw herself into his arms. It was not the less a new bewilderment, that it was an unspeakably delightful change from the last. Was he awake or dreaming? Was the dream of his boyhood come true, or was he dreaming it on in manhood? It was come true. The princess was arrived. She was here in his cave to be his own. A great calm and a boundless hope filled the heart of Alister. The night was far advanced when he left them to go home. Nor did he find his way home, but wandered all night about the tomb, making long rounds, and still returning like an angel sent to hover and watch until the morning. When he astonished them by entering as they sat at breakfast, and told them how he had passed the night, it thrilled Mercy's heart to know that, while she slept and was dreaming about him, he was awake and thinking about her. "What is only dreaming in me is thinking in you, Alister," she said. "I was thinking," returned Alister, "that as you did not know I was watching you, so, when we feel as if God were nowhere, he is watching over us with an eternal consciousness, above and beyond our every hope and fear, untouched by the varying faith and fluctuating moods of his children." After breakfast he went to see the clergyman of the parish, who lived some miles away, the result of which visit was that in a few days they were married. First, however, he went once more to the new house, desiring to tell Mr. Palmer what had been and was about to be done. He refused to see him, and would not allow his wife or Christina to go to him. The wedding was solemnized at noon within the ruined walls of the old castle. The withered remnant of the clan, with pipes playing, guns firing, and shouts of celebration, marched to the cave house to fetch thence the bride. When the ceremony was over, a feast was ready for all in the barn, and much dancing followed. When evening came, with a half moon hanging faint in the limpid blue, and the stars looking large through the mist of ungathered tears, those of nature, not the lovers, with a wind like the breath of a sleeping child, sweet and soft, and full of dreams of summer, the mountains and hills asleep around them like a flock of day-wearied things, and haunted by the angels of Rob's visions, the lovers, taking leave only of the mother, stole away to walk through the heavenly sapphire of the still night, up the hills and over the rushing streams of the spring, to the cave of their rest. No ill omen, but lovely symbol to such as could see in the tomb the porch of paradise. Where should true lovers make their bed but on the threshold of eternity? End of Volume 3, Chapter 20. Recording by HannahMary. Volume 3, Chapter 21 of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Farewell. A month passed, and the flag of their exile was seen flying in the bay. The same hour the chief's horses were put to, the carts were loaded, their last things gathered. Few farewells had to be made, for the whole clan, except 2 that had gone to the bad, turned out at the minute appointed. The chief arranged them in marching column. Foremost went the pipes. The chief, his wife, and his mother came next. Hector of the Stags, carrying the double-barrelled rifle the chief had given him, Rob of the Angels, and Donal Shoemaker followed. Then came the women and children. Next, the carts with a few who could not walk on the top of the baggage. The men brought up the rear. 4 or 5 favourite dogs were the skirmishers of the column. The road to the bay led them past the gate of the new house. The chief called a halt, and went with his wife to seek a last interview. Mr. Peregrine Palmer kept his room, but Mrs. Palmer bade her daughter a loving farewell, more relieved than she cared to show that the cause of so much discomfort was going so far away. The children wept. Christina bade her sister good-bye with a hopeless, almost envious look. Mercy, who did not love him, would see Ian. She who would give her soul for him was never to look on him again in this world. Kissing Mercy once more, she choked down a sob, and whispered, "Give my love, no, my heart to Ian, and tell him I am trying." They all walked together to the gate, and there the chief's mother took her leave of the ladies of the new house. The pipes struck up, the column moved on. When they came to the corner which would hide from them their native strath, the march changed to a lament, and with the opening wail all stopped and turned for a farewell look. Men and women, the chief alone excepted, burst into weeping, and the sound of their lamentation went wandering through the hills with an adieu to every loved spot. And this was what the pipes said: "We shall never see you more, never more, never more, till the sea be dry, and the world be bare, and the dews have ceased to fall, and the rivers have ceased to run. We shall never see you more, never more, never more." They stood and gazed, and the pipes went on lamenting, and the women went on weeping. "This is heathenish," said Alister to himself, and stopped the piper. "My friends," he cried, in Gaelic of course, "look at me, my eyes are dry. Where Jesus, the Son of God, is, there is my home. He is here, and he is over the sea, and my home is everywhere. I have lost my land and my country, but I take with me my people, and make no moan over my exile. Hearts are more than hills. Farewell, Strathruadh of my childhood, place of my dreams. I shall visit you again in my sleep, and again I shall see you in happier times, please God, with my friends around me." He took off his bonnet. All the men too uncovered for a moment, then turned to follow their chief. The pipes struck up Macramon's lament, "Till an crowd a Doncaid." Turn the kine, Duncan. Not one looked behind him again till they reached the shore. There, out in the bay, the biggest ship any of the clan had ever seen was waiting to receive them. When Mr. Peregrine Palmer saw that the land might in truth be for sale, he would gladly have bought it, but found to his chagrin that he was too late. It was just like the fellow, he said, to mock him with a chance of buying it. He took care to come himself, and not send a man he could have believed. The clan throve in the clearings of the pine forests. The hillmen stared at their harvests as if they saw them growing. Their many children were strong and healthy, and called Scotland their home. In an outlying and barren part of the chief's land they came upon rock oil. It was so plentiful that as soon as carriage became possible, the chief and his people began to grow rich. News came to them that Mr. Peregrine Palmer was in difficulties, and desirous of parting with his Highland estate. The chief was now able to buy it 10 times over. He gave his agent in London directions to secure it for him, with any other land conterminous that might come into the market. But he would not at once return to occupy it, for his mother dreaded the sea, and thought to start soon for another home. Also, he would rather have his boys grow where they were, and as men face the temptations beyond. Where could they find such teaching as that of their uncle Ian? Both father and uncle would have them alive before encountering what the world calls life. But the Macruadh yet dreams of the time when those of the clan then left in the world, accompanied, he hopes, by some of those that went out before them, shall go back to repeople the old waste places, and from a wilderness of white sheep and red deer, make the mountain land a nursery of honest, unambitious, brave men, and strong-hearted women, loving God and their neighbour, where no man will think of himself at his brother's cost, no man grow rich by his neighbour's ruin, no man lay field, to treasure up for himself wrath against the day of wrath. The End. End of Volume 3, Chapter 21. End of What's Mine's Mine by George MacDonald. Recording by HannahMary. comebestill.blogspot.com.